Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I am back again today doing another video, and the subject of today's video is going to be a follow-up on the video I just published about the San Antonio Spurs. So the last video was about like DeMar DeRozan trade possibilities, and today I'm going to be focusing on LaMarcus Aldridge. So why am I doing this series? Well, basically I realized that the Spurs are in nearly the exact same position as the Oklahoma City Thunder were before they had their fire sale on Paul George and Russell Westbrook. The Spurs also have two aging stars on expensive contracts, and really, despite having those two guys, they're basically going to be first round exits for the next couple of foreseeable seasons if they just keep their current core intact. So I think if you have any foresight, you would trade those two guys, get some future assets back and some cap relief back, and just try to build for the future. So in the last video, I covered DeMar DeRozan and destinations and teams who might be interested in trading for him. Whereas today, I will be doing the same thing, but for LaMarcus Aldridge. So let's get into some of these trade possibilities. The first trade I have on here is an interesting one, and it would be LaMarcus Aldridge headed to the Sacramento Kings, who are a team that's on the come up. They've got some nice young players in. They've got De'Aaron Fox, they've got Buddy Hield, they've got Marvin Bagley Jr., they've got Bogdan Bogdanovic and Harrison Barnes, and Niamji Bjelica, but they don't really have a guy that I feel super comfortable with starting at center if you're trying to be a playoff team. Yes, they have Dwayne Dedmon. I like him a lot, but just he's not good enough, I don't think, for this team to be relying on him as their starting center for the playoffs. Like, if De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield were a little bit better, I'd be like, okay, it's fine having Dwayne Dedmon, but I don't think he's good enough to warrant being their starting center at this point. Um, so in this trade, I have Dwayne Dedmon and Trevor Ariza going to the San Antonio Spurs, along with a 2020 first round pick and a 2020 second round pick in exchange for LaMarcus Aldridge. So why would the Kings do this? Well, basically they get an immediate big upgrade at center. They're not really giving away that much, and that Trevor Ariza basically overlapped with position with Harrison Barnes, so it's like you're gonna have to play one as a backup to the other. And with this trade, you essentially clear up that crowded wing spot, and then also the Spurs get to rebuild with the 2020 first round pick, which will probably still be lottery unless the Kings take a huge vault and get up to like the 6th seed somehow, and then also a 2020 second round pick. So they do get some draft assets here, and they also get some cap relief in that. If I look here, both Trevor Ariza's contract is much more movable at 12 million than Aldridge's, and then Dwayne Dedmon's is at 3 years, 13 million, which is very reasonable for the player that he is. So um, I think that they get two much more movable contracts, get a lot more flexibility financially, and then they get a first round pick next year, which would likely be in the lottery. So I think that they do get some good options there. And then and maybe if the Spurs are driving a real hard bargain, they might ask for like two first round picks. So if they were to do that, if I was the Kings, I would maybe consider that. I don't know. Um, LaMarcus is already like 33, I believe, so I don't know how worth it would be to them. But it would make them a pretty immediate contending team, I'd say, with a starting lineup of like De'Aaron Fox, Buddy Hield, probably Harrison Barnes, Bjelica, and LaMarcus Aldridge, with a bench that would be stellar between Marvin Bagley and Bogdan Bogdanovic and Rashawn Holmes and Harry Giles. They'd still have a lot of good players off the bench, so I think that they could be a playoff team if they were to make this trade. And yeah, that's that's basically the gist of what I think about that so far. Let's move on to the next team here, or the next trade possibility. Okay, so the next trade I have on here would be LaMarcus Aldridge going to the Golden State Warriors along with Lonnie Walker in exchange for D'Angelo Russell. So why would the Spurs do this trade? Well, basically they trade a 33-year-old meddling all-star type player for a 23-year-old all-star player. I'd say they're kind of like on the same tier of guy where it's like they're never going to be like the number one option on a championship team, but they could be like maybe the 2 option or the 3 option. Um, but then you get a D'Angelo Russell who's 10 years younger, so that's a lot more valuable in my opinion than LaMarcus, who's 33 and his star is fading. He's still an all-star player capable of putting up 18 and 9, but I'd say he only has maybe like 2 more years of that. So I think he needs to be on a team right now that's trying to win a title right away, or at least thinks that they can. That's the key. If a team thinks that they can contend, they'll trade for him. So the Warriors would, after this trade, have a starting lineup. When with everyone healthy, their starting lineup would probably be like Steph, Clay. At small forward, they'd probably go with like Glenn Robinson the third, and then they'd have Draymond and LaMarcus rounding out the starting lineup. And then off the bench, their bench would be like Kevon Looney, Alec Burks, Willie Cauley-Stein. So that'd be a really good bench right there. Um, you could even do some things where you play Draymond at small forward just a little bit, and then you have LaMarcus and Willie Cauley-Stein out there if you wanted to get really big on the court. Oh, you'd also have Lonnie Walker Jr. off the bench. So I think this would basically just be a trade where the Warriors shore up their weak post play, which has been a weakness for them over the past couple years. And they give away a player in D'Angelo who, although really good, didn't really fit what they were trying to do necessarily because he's such a pick and roll dominant player, and they don't really do pick and rolls in Golden State, so it would make sense to trade him in that sense. So yeah, D'Angelo for LaMarcus and Lonnie Walker, I feel like that's a pretty fair trade. Next, let's see here. I have a trade between the Celtics and the Spurs. I have the Celtics getting Bryn Forbes and LaMarcus Aldridge, and the Spurs getting Gordon Hayward, basically as salary cap filler, along with a 2020 first round pick and two 2020 first round picks. Those picks would be Memphis's pick and Milwaukee's pick. So Memphis's pick will be pretty good next year. That's the main trade. That's the main asset in this trade. As far as Gordon Hayward, basically just salary cap filler, but a dude who you could also start and say that you're still like a contender at the moment. Like, so you could have a starting lineup if you're the Spurs of, let's say, Derek White, DeRozan, Gordon Hayward, Rudy Gay, Jakob Poeltl, but then you still have stashed 2 first-round picks, so you could still be a relatively contending team, but then you'd have Memphis's first-round pick, which would be relatively high, I'd say, and then Milwaukee's pick, which, although it won't be super high, it's still a first-round pick, so it has value. In exchange, you give up a 33-year-old aging all-star who really is only going to give you probably 2 more years of impressive play. And then Bryn Forbes is just kind of like to even out salaries here, but he's a nice piece. If he wasn't in this, I probably would have only sent one. So if you take out Bryn Forbes, I probably would have taken out the Milwaukee first-round pick, but I feel like that's sort of what he's worth is like a late first-round pick. But you could, if the contracts, you could also try and figure something out where you send like a much more of a scrub player to the Celtics instead of Bryn Forbes, and then you take out the Milwaukee first round pick. Because I feel like this trade is essentially LaMarcus for Memphis's pick and cap filler in Gordon Hayward. But if you're the Celtics after this, you get some nice piece in LaMarcus because you're trying to contend for a title right now. Your starting lineup after this trade would look like Kemba Walker. If I were them, I'd probably start Marcus Smart and then Jaylen Brown, and then, well, they could go in a couple different directions, but the starting lineup after this trade would probably be like Kemba, Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, LaMarcus Aldridge, with a bench of like Robert Williams, Enes Kanter, Daniel Tice. But if they want more like wing depth off the bench, you could do a starting lineup of like Kemba, Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum, LaMarcus, Enes Kanter, within a bench of like Daniel Tice, Jaylen Brown, Robert Williams. So you'd have some options, but he'd definitely be an upgrade over Gordon Hayward, and you would be mortgaging the future a little bit for this. But you'd also be getting a guy who's ready to be on a win now team and is still all-star. He's still like at an all-star level, and I think he could contribute. Next, I have a return home for LaMarcus to Portland. I have Portland sending Hassan Whiteside and their 2020 first round pick to the Spurs in exchange for LaMarcus. Why would the Spurs do this? Hassan Whiteside's an immediate huge upgrade at center over Jakob Poeltl. Hassan Whiteside's actually become sort of an underrated player. People just assume he's trash, but he's actually a guy who, in his best season, was putting up like 17 points and 14 rebounds a night on decent efficiency. So I think he can still be a really good player. He just needs a spot where he can have free reign and be allowed to play like 30 plus minutes a night, which I think the Spurs would let him do because they don't really have a great NBA starting caliber center. Jakob Poeltl is more of a good backup than a starting center at this point, so Hassan could start at center for them. They'd get a first round pick to pad some insurance in case they don't want to re-sign Hassan because he is an expiring contract. From that same perspective, though, they get that money off the books a year sooner. Hassan and LaMarcus essentially have the same contract of around 26 to 27 million a year. So, but Hassan is an expiring deal, so you get that money back a year sooner and a first round pick. But if you want to re-sign Hassan, you could and bring him back on maybe a cheaper contract if you're still trying to contend in the right now. But yeah, so you get the opportunity to have a talented guy who hasn't really just found his niche yet in Hassan. You can re-sign him if you want to a cheaper deal, or you could just let him go and get financial flexibility a year sooner. You also get a first round pick, so that's pretty good. I'd say that's a pretty even haul for LaMarcus. And then as for the Trailblazers, you get a guy who much more seamlessly could play along Yusuf Nurkic because I think the spacing challenges would be tremendous between Hassan and Nurkic playing alongside each other. But with LaMarcus, you get him in there. He can space it better than Hassan could. So you get a starting lineup that looks like Dame, CJ, probably Rodney Hood, and then LaMarcus and Nurkic. That's a pretty solid starting lineup with a bench of Zach Collins and Kent Bazemore as your primary guys there. So I like this trade for them. I think that it's about equal value that they're giving up to get LaMarcus, but LaMarcus just fits their team better in that he can space it and he's more offensively gifted than Hassan Whiteside is. And then the last trade I have here, which I think is the best one for the team that's getting LaMarcus, would be a trade between the Bucks and the Spurs. I'll go through what the Spurs or what the Bucks would get really quick, but I'm going to go back to their team outlook afterwards because I think it's much more interesting. So the Bucks would be getting just LaMarcus Aldridge, and the Spurs would be getting 2 first-round picks. Indiana's 2020 first-round pick, which could be as high as like a top 5 pick if Indiana is tanking without Oladipo, or it could be just like a regular, 15th pick or something like that. And then also I have the Milwaukee sending their 2024 first round pick. So along with these 2 first round picks, the Spurs would be getting Ersan Ilyasova, Robin Lopez, and George Hill. These guys are all essentially salary filler, but they're all on way cheaper deals than LaMarcus and could be moved way easier with another combination of assets. But also they could be nice supporting pieces if you're trying to be a playoff team still. Like you could throw Robin Lopez in at starting center. You could throw Ilyasova in at starting power forward. Then you could have Rudy Gay at small forward, DeMar in at shooting guard, and then like Derek White in at point guard. That's still a team that could maybe make the playoffs. Maybe. They would have a lot of depth between George Hill, Patty Mills, DeJounte Murray, Jakob Poeltl, Bryn Forbes. So they'd still have a lot of depth too. And then they'd also be getting 2 first round picks, which is pretty good for a 33-year-old all-star in LaMarcus. And then as for the Bucks, you would get an all-star who's ready to win now, which is exactly what the Bucks are. They're a team that basically has a 2-year window before Giannis is a free agent, so they are trying to win right now. And I feel like they're essentially trading 4 quarters for $1, getting LaMarcus, in that they're giving up a bunch of smaller pieces and like depth, but they're getting back an all-star who can help them right now and be like even their second scoring option if you wanted him to be. Starting lineup after this for the Bucks would look like Eric Bledsoe, Chris Middleton, Giannis, LaMarcus, and Brook Lopez. He would kind of replace Nico Mirotic a bit, and he also can space it, whereas he can take like long 2s pretty effectively and even a couple of 3s. And I just think he's better than that combination of role players between George Hill, Ilyasova, and Robin Lopez. They lack depth after this trade, in that their bench would basically be like Dante DiVincenzo, Pat Connaughton, Wes Matthews, and DJ Wilson. But I think those guys are good enough in that like Wes Matthews could play a ton of minutes off the bench for you if you wanted him to. He could play like 30 minutes off the bench to cover up your lack of depth. DiVincenzo could be like your backup point guard, Pat Connaughton your backup shooting guard, Wes Matthews your backup small forward, and then DJ Wilson like a backup power forward. But you could play him with either Brook Lopez or LaMarcus because LaMarcus could play some center too. So they'd be good after this trade, and I think this would solidify them as like equal to anyone in the Eastern Conference because they would have like three All Stars as their core between LaMarcus, Giannis, and Middleton. I know Brook Lopez used to be an All-Star too, but he's kind of past that phase of his career. And then you'd have Eric Bledsoe, who's also a really solid option. So I like this trade for the Bucks quite a bit. And all these trades for the Spurs, like they're not going to get an equal value back basically for me besides like D'Angelo Russell. They're going to get a lot of things that don't look super fair, but like at the same time, they're getting a lot of draft picks back in all these trades, which can be valuable for a team trying to rebuild. And they're getting players back who some of them can still help the team contend right now, like D'Lo or a few of the other trades too. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts below in the comments of what you think of LaMarcus Aldridge, these trade scenarios, your own trade scenarios, the state of the Spurs in general. I'd love to hear from you. Again, hope you enjoyed the video and hope you have a good day. Bye.